Elijah, a 10-year-old boy, sat in first class, gazing out the airplane window as the city below faded into the distance. The sun dipped beyond the horizon, casting a golden glow over the clouds, painting them in hues of orange, pink, and deep purple. He traced patterns against the cold glass with his fingertip, his heart thrumming with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He was traveling alone for the first time, a responsibility that felt both thrilling and daunting. His father's words echoed in his mind like an anchor, steadying him. "Remember, Elijah, always carry yourself with dignity. The world may judge you, but you know who you are." He repeated the words in his head, almost like a silent chant, reminding himself of their weight. His father had said it often, but today, it felt different, like a test he wasn't fully prepared for. The hum of the engines blended with the soft murmur of conversations around him, an oddly comforting white noise. Businessmen typed away on sleek laptops, their fingers moving rapidly across keyboards as they muttered into Bluetooth earpieces. A woman flipped through a glossy magazine, her nails clicking against the pages. A couple sitting nearby clinked their champagne glasses together, whispering and laughing in hushed voices. The air carried the crisp scent of fresh linens and warm bread, mingling with the faint aroma of expensive perfume from the passengers around him. He glanced down at the tray in front of him. His meal sat untouched, the glass of sparkling water beside it catching the dim cabin light. Everything felt peaceful, orderly, until a shadow loomed over him. A flight attendant, her navy uniform neatly pressed, her blonde hair tied into a flawless bun, paused beside his seat. The look she gave him wasn't one of warmth or hospitality. It was one of doubt. "Excuse me, young man," she said, her voice clipped, polite but distant. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Elijah blinked up at her, momentarily startled. He sat up straighter, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Yes. I have permission to be here." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, her skepticism deepened. She scanned his neatly pressed clothes, the seat number, the pristine setting around him, as if something about it all didn't add up. "This is first class," she said slowly, enunciating each word. "You don't belong here." The word struck like a slap, sharp and unexpected. Elijah felt a weight settle in his chest, a tightness forming like a knot. He clenched his hands into fists, keeping them firmly on his lap, hidden from view. He thought about ignoring her, letting it pass, but his father's voice surfaced again in his mind, "Carry yourself with dignity." He met her gaze. "I do belong here," he said, his tone unwavering. Sarah scoffed, shifting her weight onto one hip, her lips curling slightly as if amused by his defiance. "A child like you?" she said, her voice dropping lower. "You should go back to where you came from." The knot in his chest twisted tighter, turning from shock into something hotter, anger. A sharp sting of indignation coursed through him. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about something much bigger, something unfair. He straightened his back. "I don't need your approval," he shouted, his voice shaking slightly. The sound cut through the cabin like a blade. The entire section fell silent. Conversations halted. Forks paused midair. Passengers turned in their seats, eyes flickering between him and the flight attendant. A businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper. An elderly woman raised her eyebrows, watching intently. For a second, it felt like the moment might pass. But then, in a single instant, Sarah's expression twisted with something unreadable, and before he could react, she slapped him. A collective gasp rippled through the plane. Elijah's cheek burned, but the real pain ran deeper, the injustice of it, the sheer humiliation. His breath hitched, and he willed himself not to let the stinging in his eyes turn into tears. He refused to let her see him break. A man in a navy suit shot to his feet, his face tight with anger. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "You can't do that to a child." A woman near the back, her voice sharp with outrage, chimed in. "That was unacceptable. He has every right to be here." Murmurs swelled among the passengers. A mother clutching her toddler shot a glare at Sarah. A young flight attendant near the galley shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward the commotion. Sarah took a step back, her face paling as she realized the weight of what she had just done. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out, and then, the cabin door opened, and the pilot stepped out. He was an older man, with sharp eyes and a presence that immediately demanded attention. He scanned the tense scene before him. "What's going on here?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Sarah stammered, looking flustered. Elijah, however, was done being silent. He stood, his chin lifted, his voice steady. "I belong here." The pilot's gaze settled on him, studying him for a long moment. Then he turned his attention to Sarah. "Is there a problem, Sarah?" She faltered. For the first time, her confidence wavered. I just thought that he didn't belong." The pilot finished for her. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. The pilot turned back to the passengers. "This is Elijah Lawson," he announced, his voice clear. "Son of Richard Lawson, the owner of this airline. He has every right to be in first class." A fresh wave of silence washed over the room. Some passengers exchanged guilty glances. Others looked away, suddenly interested in their napkins or meals. Even the businessman who had lowered his newspaper shifted awkwardly in his seat. Sarah's face drained of color. She looked trapped, caught in her own misjudgment. Elijah took a slow breath. He could feel the shift in the air, the way people now looked at him differently, with something closer to respect. But something inside him ached, because that respect was only given when they learned his last name. Would they have defended him if they didn't know? Did he really need his father's name to prove his worth? He had learned something much more valuable today. His worth wasn't in his last name. It was in his strength. His ability to stand up for himself. The flight continued, though the atmosphere had changed. Sarah disappeared toward the back of the plane, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Passengers slowly returned to their meals, though every now and then, someone would glance at him, their expressions unreadable. As the plane began its descent, Sarah hesitated before approaching him. Her voice was softer now, tinged with something that almost sounded like guilt. "I'm sorry for what happened," she said quietly. Elijah studied her. He saw the discomfort in her eyes, the regret mixed with embarrassment. For a moment, he considered ignoring her, letting her sit with the weight of her actions. But then he remembered his father's words. "Carry yourself with dignity." He gave her a small nod. "Just remember," he said, his voice measured, "everyone deserves respect." She swallowed, nodding back before quickly retreating. As Elijah stepped off the plane, his mother stood waiting for him at the gate. The moment she saw him, she pulled him into a tight hug. She didn't ask what had happened, she simply held him, sensing something had changed. "You seem different," she said gently, brushing a hand over his cheek. Elijah met her eyes and smiled, his gaze steady, filled with a quiet confidence. "I learned a lot on the flight." Maria saw the strength in her son's eyes and knew, he wasn't just growing up. He was becoming a leader.